from the campus of Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. This week on Q&A, Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels discusses his new book, Keeping the Republic.
Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana, in your book on page 229, somewhere the skeptics are snickering. They smugly predicted that the government would fall prey to the very weaknesses we now display and would founder on the very consequences we now confront. They believed with the same confidence that the ailments would prove fatal. Now that's near the end, and why were you talking about the skeptics, and who are they?
The skeptics is that long line of people, beginning really at the dawn of democracy in ancient Greece, who very cynically said that government by the people might be a cute idea, but it couldn't work for long. That it would break down either because politicians would learn to pander, would learn to promise more than could be afforded, and or that the people themselves would eventually lose the character traits, the stubborn commitment to liberty, the determination to make their own decisions in life that gave birth to liberty. And Erskine Bowles, this incredibly admirable person who was the Democratic co-chair of the recent Bowles-Simpson Commission, has been making a very, I think, sound observation recently. He says, when he's we're facing the most predictable crisis in our history. He's talking about correctly about the debts that we've piled up and the fact that we cannot pay them and meet the additional commitments that are on the books now. And what I'm saying there is, yes, and it was predictable in an even larger sense. Plato predicted it, Voltaire predicted it, Nietzsche predicted it. Our founding fathers worried incessantly that this experiment in self-government would run aground. And the title of the book, which I'm sure every Purdue student recognized immediately, comes from Ben Franklin's famous comment. He's leaving in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. The ink is just barely dry on the draft of the Constitution. Reportedly, a lady called out, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" And he said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And they're at the very conception of the American system. Our founders, all of them, Adams, Madison, Jefferson, they all worried about this. Can we keep it together? The only thing I would say when I talk about the skeptics there is, shortly on the other side of that quote, Brian, I end on a note of optimism. Yeah, sure, we can do this. The American people are the people who will prove that cynicism about self-government was wrong.
There's a person in this audience that has said to me within the last month, who is from this state, very simply, we're going down. This country is going down. What evidence do you have that either that's not true, or what would you advise this person who I think probably voted for you?
Buck up. No, I would say this person's paying close attention. It is not impossible at all. Every great leading nation eventually has gone down. And in every one of them, I'm quite certain people were in denial or didn't see it coming or said, just can't happen here. And if we fall prey to that, we may suffer the consequences sooner than we need to. But I think it's premature. And in any event, we should never surrender to fatalism about these things. A whole lot I've tried to say in this book that's based on faith, and I admit it. But it's been well said that democracy is and always was a leap of faith. And there is time to deal with the really daunting arithmetic of our debts. It won't be easy. There is time to restore a growth rate in the American economy that gives us a chance to put people back to work, rebuild very importantly, I think, the optimism, the American dream we've called it, that says, no, we've been through tough times before, but Americans never doubted that tomorrow would be better someday, that our children would live better than we. That's at risk right now. So I know exactly what this person was saying, but no, Greece is going down. There's probably a couple other countries in Europe that are going down. And the United States need not go down, but we better get busy soon.
How much time do we have?
We don't know, but it might not be much. I wrote a chapter here. I got together with some real economists. This is sort of an amateur's book, and I try not to be pretentious about any of it. I mean, there's a chapter on the debt, but I don't try to. There's a lot of books about that already. There's a chapter on the history that we just talked about, but it's not long. Don't worry. I start one chapter with a little nightmare scenario about how economic collapse and really the social collapse that could follow that could come very quickly in a flash crash world like we live in. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't predict it. Heaven forbid. But there's a chance. As the markets are for you till they're against you. And as Lehman Brothers found out, and as other institutions have, if you're borrowing a lot of money to do what you're doing, we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar your federal government spends right now. You really are at risk of somebody saying, this is good money after bad, we're not doing it anymore. And if the whole world of lenders that makes that decision at once, you're in a world of hurt.
Can you tell us the exact moment when you decided you were not going to run for president?
Yeah, it was when you were interviewing me in 2009 on June the 9th. I went back and looked this morning. I'll give you a more accurate answer in a minute.
He's blaming me for this.
I'm trying to give you credit. You saved America, possibly. Brian, in the superb professional way that nobody does better, really, zoomed in. You pointed out, maybe you'll remember, that I had said to the people of Indiana, this is the only office I ever ran for, the only office I intend to run for. Rehire us, we'll give you 4 years of hard work every single day. And you said, really? What? And then you said to me in that interview, what are you going to say on the day you change your mind? How are you going to explain it? Which is a fair question, but now I don't have to answer it. No, the answer... No,
but what was... Yeah. Can I preface it by saying this? I think any casual observer who reads books of politicians reads this book and says, this book was written so it would come out at a time where you had just announced for president, and this is a serious book. It's not as you say in there, it's not a kind of a cheesy autobiography about all the great things you've done in your life. So that'd be
a really short book.
It reads like a very serious blueprint.
Well, let me say, that would be a casual observer, because that is exactly the reverse of the truth. To answer your question that I slipped a minute ago, I finally decided, after visiting with my family in whatever that was, April or May, and that's when I decided for sure, and promptly told everybody, because I'd kept a lot of people waiting on that answer. About the genesis of this book, it's important for me that people know this. Someone started suggesting to me 2 years ago, I'll write a book, and I said, well, what kind? And they had books in mind I didn't think would be worth my time to write or people's time to read, autobiographical or how to be a good governor or something like that. I said, no, if I was going to go the time and trouble writing a book, I would write about what's bothering me about the country, this inexorable arithmetic iceberg we are headed for, and what we ought to do to revalidate the promise of American life, and, by the way, prove our capacity for self-governance. They said, fine, write that book. So I wrote up an outline, which is what people say you do, and I was really proud of the first sentence. I intended it to be the first sentence of the book, which was, so many books are written because the author intends to run for President of the United States. This one's written specifically because I don't. But I'm concerned about the country, and let me tell you why. I thought, well, that's pretty catchy. You know, that's a grabber. So the agent who went to market this book said, there's just one. He said, I want to help you out. I said, let's go. He said, there's just one thing. So my Midwest antenna go up. What's the catch? He says, you got to change that first sentence. Well,
You want me to read it?
the way it came out, no, it's not nearly as catchy as
Well,
what
let
I
me read
started.
it to you.
Okay.
Despite a long involvement with public life, I have read very few books by public officials, past or present. Judging by the ones I've read, many are written to justify the author's actions, or worse, to settle personal scores.
Well, that's the way
But
that's the way they look to me. I guess the only point I want to make, Brian, is I wrote this book in lieu of being a candidate. That was my clear point of view when I wrote it. The book was mainly written on weekends in the fall and winter last year. It was basically done by the first of the year. I was ready to turn in my homework early, but the publishers said they didn't want to bring it out till Labor Day anyway. It was their decision for marketing reasons, I guess. But anyway, I think the biggest point I'd like to make is, for anybody who should read the book, I don't think it reads much like the standard candidates books, because it goes into more detail and it says things a little more plainly. Let me put it this way. If I had decided to run and whoever was going to help me do it got a hold of that book before it came out, they'd have begged me not to publish it, because they'd have said, well, somebody can, there's something on every page somebody can shoot at.
I've got Purdue students who are ready to ask some questions. One last question is regarding that. When you go back to the decision, and I assume you've been asked this already, but if the country is in such bad shape and you've got the solution and you're about out of time as governor and you can't run again, why not take a chance, throw your hat in and run? Don't you owe that to the country?
Some say, and I haven't tried to argue people out of that. I mean, it's the hardest single question. People say, look, you're so passionate about this, and you think things are where it is difficult an historical moment as this. They say a lot of people risk more than their reputations in a campaign. They risk their lives for this country. Their families would rather they didn't. I don't have a good answer to that. I simply felt that there was a collision of the two highest priorities in my life, and I picked the one that outranked all else. But I don't try to argue with people who say, well, that was a non-patriotic thing or a craven thing to do. I also agree with the Frenchman who said that, remember, the cemeteries are full of indispensable men. And I don't think in any great endeavor and reestablishing the hope and promise and strength of this nation will be the greatest of endeavors, any one person is indispensable. There are other roles you can play, and I'm trying to find a way to make a constructive contribution other than running.
Who's got the mic? Tell us who you are and ask the first question to the governor.
Change spots. All right. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Brett Hiley. I'm the current president of Purdue Student Government, and I'm a senior in political science. My question is, in recent years, we've seen a change in perception of higher education in the state of Indiana, and indeed nationally. It's becoming less of a public service and more of a private commodity. And as students, we see this when we get our billing statements from the bursar's office with the increases in tuition. So I was hoping you could speak to the nature of that change in perception, the resulting costs, and also the outlook for future students in terms of accessibility to higher education.
Well, I think, I'm not sure I agree with your characterization, Brett. I think that the value of higher education has never been more apparent. Value, I'm just going to say in particular, of this school with the emphases it has on the most economically valuable disciplines, science and engineering and computer science and ag and all the rest. I'll just speak for myself. It's never been a higher priority. I tried and came up short to undertake a transaction 3 or 4 years ago that would have put $1 billion of new cash in Indiana higher education. And if I ever saw an opening to do such a thing again, I would. I do think that keeping higher education affordable and accessible is extraordinarily important, and everybody's got a role to play. I think some good things have been going on here at Purdue. For example, to get overhead under control and to see that the place runs more efficiently, but there's a long way to go there. And in addition to things that your fellow taxpayers can do, there are things that those leading higher education have to take responsibility for too.
Next.
Marissa Strupp, senior, graduating May 2012, Vice President of Communication for American Advertising Federation, and Vice President of Communication for Public Relations Student Society of America. Governor Daniels, my question concerns the capacity of self-government discussed in your book. What obligation do we, as a sovereign state of Indiana, have to provide affordable health care for the members of our state who cannot secure affordable health care for their families?
Yeah, Marissa, I think it's, obviously I think it's important because we created such a program. It's called the Healthy Indiana Plan. I discuss it in the book. And, you know, as recently as this morning, a lady coming through the line almost tearfully told me how much it has meant to her daughter, I guess it was, and her family to have the peace of mind of health insurance when they didn't before. You know, not to take a long detour, but it is relevant to another theme of the book, which is that, again, we should trust the American people more than some of our policies do to take control of their own lives. You see this very clearly in the plan for the low-income uninsured that I just talked about. These folks have control of a personal account. They make their own decisions about first dollar health care. Then they're protected in true insurance fashion if there's an illness or an injury that's very expensive. But what they are proving, same thing is, by the way, is true of our state employees, almost 90% of whom are in a health savings account-like program. Folks who say that, you know, this is just too complicated, the average citizen just can't cope with health care, or by the way, can't be permitted to choose what credit card or mortgage or light bulb they will select, I think are selling people short. And we are seeing very effective consumerist behavior in the low-income uninsured program called HIP, and in our state employee program. Double digits below, the cost to them and to us is double digits below the standard program. So yes, I believe we've got to find ways to give everybody this protection. And as we do, I hope we'll do it in a way that shows confidence in people's ability to look out for themselves. Incidentally, I think it's the only effective way, or it's an indispensable element of getting costs under control for us all. I always say we'll never have cost control in healthcare until all of us are cost controllers.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Alex Illiam. I'm the Vice President of Special Events for Purdue Public Relations, Student Society of America. My question, Governor Daniels, relates to, in light of Purdue's Green Week and in the state of our current economy, do you think there's room in the budget for investing in green resources and technologies as a way to stabilize this economy by creating green jobs?
Limited, Alex. I'm a big proponent of public investment in discovery or early stage R&D. There's a very spotty is too generous. There's a very poor track record when government tries to go beyond that and be involved in applied research or development, let alone commercialization. This disaster at the company called Solyndra is only the latest of a long, long line of such failures. Take a look at the synfuels era of the 1970s and early 80s. If you need more evidence. You know, the jobs and the businesses of today, first thing is, I don't know one that isn't green, or at least a lot greener than it used to be. The whole idea of these green jobs, though, has been exposed as factually very flawed. There are vastly fewer of them than anybody had predicted. Even when you count things that, like clerical jobs, they try to load up the numbers to make it look bigger than it is. And, we in Indiana are a leader in alternative fuels, for instance, and where these programs have promise enough to be commercializable in their own right, bring them on. But at a time when the nation is, our governmental budgets are busted, to pour money into them, I think, is a very poor investment based on no good evidence.
Who has the next question?
Hi, Patrick Essex. I'm undergraduate senior, majoring in public relations and advertising, member of Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society and American Advertising Federation. My question to Governor Daniels is, I've heard that while the director of Office of Management and Budget under President Bush, you were instrumental in creating a plan to eliminate the national debt, but due to the events of September 11th, that plan cannot be put into action. Obviously, the debt has swelled and circumstances have changed, but could your plan still be implemented, or could you work with the president to create another plan to alleviate the debt?
Well, thanks, Patrick. First of all, yes, there was a moment where a lot of people, it wasn't just me, everybody basically in Washington believed the nation was on a trajectory to reduce or even eliminate the national debt. We were all wrong. I talk about it in this book. It was, and so no, the plan that the president put forward, from among those alternatives our group tried to craft for him, would not have worked. And the reason is that all such plans were based on an economic forecast and really a revenue forecast of the federal government that quickly disappeared. It was based on the dot-com bubble of the late 90s. There was a gusher of revenue came in for about 2 or 3 years. And everybody thought, well, that's the base and it'll go up at some percentage in the future. But that was wrong. It was based on a stock market bubble. It was really based on a lot of rich people making an incredible amount of money from options and stock grants and dividends for a little while. And when the bubble popped, that revenue just evaporated. Now, we'd be in better shape than we were if less money had been spent in the interim. After September 11th, you're quite right. There were big new costs taken on. 2 wars and the construction of a whole new activity in government we now call Homeland Security. I went to the National Press Club in November of 2001, gave a speech where I said, look, here's the history. I laid out the history of past conflicts. When the nation got in one, we're going to have this new cost. In every previous instance, we had reduced spending on other things, sometimes drastically. Go look one day at what Harry Truman did to the rest of government spending when he committed the nation to Korea. Well, we didn't do that. And in fairness, I will remind everyone, it was a Republican Congress that rejected any such advice. And they sort of kept spending going on all the activities we had, and then put the Homeland Security and eventually the military spending on top. It'll take a new strategy now. We're in a very different situation and much worse. To make no apology for any decision made in the previous decade, the biggest deficit we ran, even after 2 wars and the Homeland Security, is 1/3 the size. 1/3 the size of the ones we're running every year now. And even after those new expenditures, by 2007, the federal deficit was 1.2% of GDP. Which is minuscule compared to today and even to history. Now, we're in a different place now, and I don't think it's useful in any way to start waste precious time talking about, who was most to blame for how we got there. We better be talking about the common problem that each of us has, cross ideology, cross party, cross income group and age group in avoiding the disaster that's ahead if we keep drifting.
Well, the next student's getting ready to ask a question. I have a question that's a little bit on a lighter note. In your book, you say that you have stayed in over 100 homes of Hoosiers.
All right.
All night on the couch and whatever, maybe the spare bedroom.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that one night where you said to yourself, this was a mistake? You don't have to name names, just tell us.
Well, you don't have to worry about that. I wouldn't out anybody in quite that way. Well, you know, I guess there's, I think we're 113 now, 113 or 14 different homes, and it's been a wonderful thing to do, and I've made a lot of great friends. Had a cookout. Second time I've done this, Brian, had a cookout this summer and invited everybody who put me up overnight so they could meet each other. Oh, there have been a couple where folks maybe went a little too far in inviting in the family, inviting in the neighborhood. And, you know, that's okay, by the way. I've learned so much. This whole notion started just as a way to save a little money. You know, no-name first-time candidate. I didn't like asking people for money, and you know, I just said, why would we spend this scarce campaign money on a hotel room? You say we got some volunteers, don't they have a spare bedroom? And but quickly it became A, fun, almost always, and B, very informative. And I've stayed in every kind of place you can imagine. We purposely do this. We try never to stay in the homes of people who are politically too active, because I can see them in other ways. So I'll tell you, I've seen it all. You know, guest rooms, spare rooms, lots of kids' rooms. Wake up with little pink bunny rabbits all over, and like, where am I? I've gotten lost running in the morning, and they had to send the posse out to find me. One time I couldn't get the shower to work. They had some newfangled device I couldn't, and so I was too embarrassed to admit I was so darn dumb that and probably some Purdue engineer invented this thing. And so I took the first bath I take since I was 8 years old. But no, I guess it's happened very rarely. You know, some folks just get exuberant about it, and so some, at the end of a long day, and it's usually at the end of a full day of travel, a couple hours is about right. And some folks have stretched that, but not often.
You're welcome anytime with us. We have a clock that goes off every hour.
So. Perfect.
Julie?
Hi, my name's Julie Smith. I'm a senior in communications studying public relations and advertising, and I'm also the current president of the Association for Women in Communications. My question to you is, as a student who's looking to enter the job force in the coming year, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to job growth in the current economy?
Julie, I guess the first thing I want to say is that there are big forces at work in the world economy now which are making growth hard. There's an overcapacity of manufacturing capacity, for instance. And there are huge slowdowns in other economies that have an impact on us. The whole process we call globalization has brought many benefits, but it has also, as we know, led to the immigration of many jobs to lower cost environments. So what I have to say doesn't pretend for a moment that it's all the fault of national policy. That wouldn't be right. But I do believe that national policy today in America is backwards in the most important way it can be, and your question goes straight to it. Faced with all those headwinds and looking at this incredible debt burden that's coming, this gigantic mortgage payment that's going to fall on all of us, but on people your age worst of all, it's just, to me, very obvious that with all the priorities we have, and they're all worthy, till further notice, every decision the national government makes, every close call should be made in favor of economic growth. Every tie should be broken in favor of growth of the private sector. It's the only place that real and lasting jobs will come from. It's the only place by the way, that the revenue we need, the higher tax payments we need to meet our debts and pay our bills can come from. And I'm sorry to say that it's been operating almost the other way. Action after action and threatened action after threatened action. More taxes and the threat of more. More regulations and the threat of more. Sometimes the disparagement of specific industries or businesses. It's as though the administration were out to make it more expensive and more difficult to hire people. And they wouldn't think of it that way. I finally decided to just have a blind spot. But it's a harmful one. And so this is going to be very difficult, I know, for some people. Folks say, boy, I talk a lot in here about reshaping the safety net programs, at least, starting prospectively, and how politically untouchable this has all been and how risky that is. And I say, yeah, sure, but even harder maybe to say, listen, to take the most obvious example, we ought to celebrate the environmental improvements that have been made in this country. Too many conservatives refuse to acknowledge regulation, properly done, has played a real role. You may know, but very few high school students that I visit with in this state know that the air they're breathing right now and the water outside is dramatically cleaner than it was when Brian was in school or I was in school or even my kids were in school. And it's a positive thing. But we're going to have to hit the pause button on a lot of this because right now, nothing comes close as a national priority to getting the private sector growing again. So there's opportunity for people coming up and starting their lives. So there's opportunity for those who've been displaced recently, perhaps to get back in the workforce. And so there's a fighting chance, as I said, of meeting our public obligations. So that's my take on things, and it's got to be central in the big national conversation we need.
Next student question. While they're getting up, I want to ask you, when you said you weren't going to run for president, which candidate on the Republican side did not call you asking for your support?
Well, a couple of them didn't. There's a couple of them I don't know too well. Shot you did. Well, Ms. Bachman didn't call. Let me see. I'm disappointed.
Did Sarah Palin call you?
No, don't know her well, really. I'm kind of disappointed that Johnson didn't call because he's an interesting character.
Gary Johnson.
Yeah, but no, some did, some didn't, but they're busy, and I'm not sure it would help them much if I said I was for them. Might work the other way.
Hi, I'm Ashley Sankari. I'm a sophomore majoring in political science. And my question for you is, what is your current position regarding the George Bush tax cuts that are set to expire in 2012?
Well, Ashley, I wouldn't raise anybody's taxes right now. And that's what that would amount to. Raising taxes on a staggering economy is a very risky thing to do. I would also tell you that I don't see the big upside that some people seem to. If you do what the president keeps saying and you raise taxes, that is, you go back to the old rates for those above that cutoff line, is 250, I guess. You know what percentage of the debt problem you just solved? 4. And so the question is, and by the way, that assumes that it doesn't hurt the economy at all, which nobody can know whether it would or wouldn't. So if you cancel the whole thing all the way up and down the income scale, you're still a single digit. Again, assuming what, in that case, I really would doubt that it doesn't hurt the economy at all. No, I tell you, I think that a much better way forward, and I'm hardly alone in this, the bold Simpson Commission said the same thing. If you're looking for reasons for optimism, the person who said we're finished, that I tried to cheer up a little bit ago, and here's one. There's a really broad consensus now across the spectrum that a really useful step here would be to go back and weed the garden of the tax code, as we did in 1986, and close or at least limit the use of all these exceptions, all these preferences, all these, people like to say, loopholes, these bookshelf of tax rules we have that nobody can understand, and lower and flatten the rates so they're simpler and fairer. Stop trying to engineer things either economically or socially. Almost every economist I know says that would be good for growth. Money would start finding its way, not where the tax code wants it to go, but where it's got the most promise of profits and therefore hiring people. And I think that'd be a lot more productive way to go. Let me say something that your question evokes. I agree with those who say that to solve this incredibly desperate situation we're in, everybody's got to pitch in. No question. Absolutely, including those in upper income brackets. But I think they're looking in the wrong place. They talk about, turning the thumb screws a little tighter on the wealthy. You'll only get a small amount of money, if any. And you may have harmful consequences. If you go the different route, the one I suggested, two things are absolutely sure. If you grow the economy faster, we'll have more tax revenue, which we so badly need. And two, the wealthy will pay more, and they'll pay a higher share than they do today. It happens every time. I think in order to get participation from the well-off, you got to do two things. One, close those provisions in the tax code. Two, stop sending benefits to them and concentrate the money of Social Security and Medicare on those who really need it.
We've got some time left, and anybody who wants to ask a question can just come to the center there and fire away. I think, do we have, Paul, you have a question? Right ahead. Go ahead.
My name is Paul Norwin. I'm an alumnus at Purdue. Mr. Lamb, first I'd like to thank you and John Wheeler and C-SPAN for everything you do for educators across the state. The question I do have is for you, Mr. Lamb. With your background and contacts and everything that you've done and your ties locally, if the folks here in the third row, the trustees, came to you in their infinite wisdom, said, "We'd like you as our new president of the university, would you be interested?"
Hey.
Mr. Norwine, would you like to have a seat? I would immediately recommend Tim McGinley. He needs something to keep him busy over there. Next question.
Well, I can never get away with that.
That was dangerous.
Lamb never lets me get away with that.
This question again is for the governor. My name is Karen McIver. I'm a senior in communication. I'm the president of PRSSA. I'm actually currently looking at the Orr Fellowship as an option after graduation. I'm just wondering, why do you think it's important for students and professionals to stay in Indiana as opposed to going to other cities and states?
Oh, because I want them to live the best and most prosperous life possible. Here. And this is the place to do it.
Governor, tell the National Audience what an Orr Scholarship is.
Yeah, a wonderful predecessor of mine, Governor Bob Orr, was honored, I guess, by some folks who set up a great program in which top graduates, it's 2 years as I recall, spend 2 years, businesses agree to give a business experience to such a person. So they get a really outstanding talent. That young person gets a really diverse and productive business experience for a couple years. And then there are seminar programs. I always see them. I know they go around and see other people in public life too. So there's sort of an educational component with a real business base underneath it. I think it's a great model, and I would recommend it to other states who may not have something like it. Karen, let me give you a piece of news that came to us rather recently that's really important to me. In a reversal of the historical pattern, more people with college degrees are moving into Indiana now than are moving out. The margin's not big, but this is a big change. And here's something else. We dug a little deeper and confirmed a suspicion I have, and this is a big thanks to Purdue as much as anybody. On top of that, people moving in versus people moving out, Indiana enjoys a very large, I'm going to call it, balance of intellectual capital because of the great schools that we have. By a margin of something like 13 or 14,000, I think it was, more students from elsewhere are studying at Purdue or IU or our many other colleges and universities than Hoosier kids studying out of state. And so we've been working as hard as we can to build the kind of state, a place of opportunity, a welcoming environment for people and businesses, in the hope that we can capitalize on this and become a magnet for talent. And just walking from the pavement to here and stopping and accosting student after student, I kept running into students from elsewhere, and I always want to hug them. You know, I always say the best thing that happens to any state in this world is when talent moves in. And thanks to places like Purdue, I think we're doing a little better.
Anybody, another student? I want to read you. Anybody wants to ask a question, just step up by the mic. But I want to read back a quote that you use a series of quotes in here under your Skeptics chapter. Mm-hmm. I mean, you clearly set up a rather dismal situation here in the United States as we begin this book. So here's Robert Samuelson from the Washington Post. Yeah. And I want to ask you why you put it in here. He says, the system can no longer make choices, especially unpleasant choices, for the good of the nation as a whole. The trouble is that despite superficial support for deficit reduction or tax reform, few Americans would surrender their own benefits, subsidies, and tax breaks, a precondition of success. Samuelson describes the situation as suicidal government.
I put it in there because he is, first of all, anyone who doesn't read him, don't skip one of his columns. He's unfailingly astute and scrupulously nonpartisan and balanced. Robert Samuelson, son of the great Paul Samuelson, the great economist. I put it there because he is expressing, first of all, a very commonly held view. Secondly, he is reporting accurately that if you go around and ask people in a poll these days, they think you can fix this problem if you just stop foreign aid or cut something remote from them, when that's not, mathematically, that's not the case or close to it. But it's also there because ultimately I'm going to come to that conclusion we talked about later, which is, sure we can. The American people do still have self-government and the elements that make it possible at the core of our character, and addressed openly and honestly as freeborn citizens. They can understand the facts of life we're looking at. They can understand that we cannot do everything we'd like to do for absolutely everybody all at the same time when we're broke. And they can support choices and maybe the postponement of things till a better day that we'd all like to do. I'm not equating the two at all. They're not close in size or complexity. But we've had that conversation in Indiana for 7 years. And you don't get everybody on board, but a broad majority of Hoosiers has said over and over, we get it. We might wish it were different, but we're going to support policies that are in the interest of us all. And if it means something that I dearly believe in has to take a little less or wait a little while, okay.
Well, the fact that you said you're not going to run for office again might allow me to do something that I normally wouldn't do, and that is correct you. Would you be terribly upset if I correct you?
Well, I don't think I have any choice about it, so... No.
The only reason I'm going to correct you is I've made the same mistake you made, and when I was at Purdue University, I studied a book by Paul Samuelson. And so every time I've interviewed Robert Samuelson, or have said anything about him, I've said he's the son of Paul Samuelson.
He's not.
And he is not.
Oh, they are related.
I apologize to you. They are not related.
Wow. Well,
he gets real tired of people like me saying, "Are you the son of Paul Samuelson?" So don't feel bad.
Well, thank you. I won't.
You're welcome.
I won't label him that way again. But I'm sure I read it somewhere, which means I'm probably not. I can't be the first to make that mistake.
Well, I used to say it myself until finally sunk in.
I don't think I put it in the book, though, did I?
Yes. No, you didn't.
No, I didn't.
You did not put it in the book. All right, another quote. And by the way, some of you Democrats out here ought to ask. There's a chance to confront your governor if you have a question. If you're a student or whatever. Alicia, are you going to ask a question? Yes. Come on. Here's the editor of the Exponent.
Hi, Governor Daniels.
Hi.
My name is Alicia. I'm a junior studying anthropology, and like Mr. Lamb said, I'm also the editor-in-chief of the
Yep.
student newspaper here. But my question is, as your term ends this semester for us and the gubernatorial election is going on, what is something that you think the next governor of Indiana needs to make their top priority? Or what do you think that that person really needs to get done?
Alicia, I mean, of course, it's not for me to say, but it's a fair question. I'll give you, so I'll answer you and say that, first of all, that certain priorities don't go away because we didn't come close to finishing them. Continuing to build the best possible climate for job growth has got to be job one. And we've made a lot of headway. We're on the top of everybody's list now, but it's very frustrating, you know, to be rated as highly as Indiana is, and at a time when the national economy is basically stopped. I've said to people, to several audiences, I said, you know, getting to the top of all those ratings and then the recession comes, I said it was like being the prettiest girl in school and they called off the prom. But that, you know, the constant effort to look for ways, we've done a lot, but I know there's so much more can be done to make this always a more inviting and affordable place to hire Hoosiers and do business. So that's one. We've made huge strides, I believe, in K-12 education now from a statutory and a framework standpoint. But it'll be the work of years to make those work well, to implement these changes. Passing a law is step one, and I believe and others outside Indiana believe Indiana's gone to the front row now in terms of education reform. But we haven't, but no student has yet improved their academic performance because of it. We've got to make this all work. We've got to find the ways to make it fair to all. So, and I'll go back to the first question. I mean, we've got to make some big, I think, moves in higher ed. I don't pretend to know all of them, but as the first question pointed out, it's extraordinarily important to the state and the nation's future. And at the same time, the business model that we've been operating with in higher ed, I think, is starting to look a little shaky to me. And there are, just as Borders Books just found out to its distress, at some stage, other competitors, aided by technology or other efficiencies, can undermine what looked like a very solid enterprise fairly soon. This is not a Purdue comment. This is an American higher ed comment. But I think the next governor of this state and all states got to be working on this to make sure that our institutions of higher ed are as strong as they can be, and also are affordable to those who want to attend them, or we'll have a very different looking system in 10 or 15 years, maybe with a lot of new players in it and a lot fewer people in the schools that we've known.
Thanks, Alicia. Megan Grady, right behind you. Megan?
Hi, Governor Daniels.
Hi, Megan.
I'm a junior in political science and communication here at Purdue, and I'm actually from the Lafayette area. What you've been talking about, especially with education, really feeds into my question. I am the granddaughter and the daughter of public school teachers, so I've been very personally affected by some of the changes you've made in education. And I know education is very important to you too, and you've really expressed that today. I was sort of wondering, why have you recently, in your term, you really seem to tend more towards funding charter schools and private schools? Why do you find that those are the places to invest our money as opposed to the public schools?
Well, first of all, charter schools are public schools. They're fully public schools. They're just public schools that choose to operate without the rules, some of the rules and the encumbrances that traditional public schools have used. You know, the changes we've just made in Indiana, it's always important for me to start by saying, have been championed in the main by President Obama and his Secretary of Education. You know, as somebody who disagrees with so many things that they've done, I do feel it's really my obligation to stress when I agree with something they've done, and I've done this, and so I have said this over and over again. We went a little further, and you mentioned one way, but in general, those things that we recently did we think, bring more accountability to public education and more freedom to principals and superintendents to run their schools so they can get better results, are exactly what Secretary Duncan and the President have, I think, very courageously argued for. Charter schools is one of those things. There's no bigger proponent in America of charter schools than the President and the folks around him. And we're seeing some wonderful results now that we've got the wraps off those in Indiana. The last part of it is, you mentioned, is Indiana now has the nation's largest program that allows the parent, if it's their choice, the parent, not the state, to utilize the taxpayer dollars at a non-government school. It is means tested, as such programs should be. So to me, it's a social justice question first. I was hugged with tears in my eyes, not for the first time, last night in Fort Wayne by a black mom whose child is now at a school she believes is much better for that child. And so the first thing we said was, it isn't right that low or moderate income families are told there's one and only one school your kid can go to, but your better off neighbors have a world of choices. They can move or they can pay tuition somewhere. I don't think it'll ever be a large phenomenon in our state. I believe that 10 years from now we'll still be having probably 90% or more of Hoosier kids in public schools. But I hope those schools, if they're not called charter schools, will look more like them. And they'll be operating them more flexibly. They'll be promoting and protecting the teachers who do the best job, not just the ones who've been there the longest. Every one of these things, I promise you, starts with the question, what is best for the children? And we work back from there.
We have about 5 minutes left. By the way, did you write this book yourself?
Every word.
What time of day did you do it?
Mainly weekends in the fall and in the winter of last year. And, holidays, but
What'd you write it on?
A PC.
We ask this question all the time. Nothing unusual for the governor. Yes, sir.
Logan Lambton, Assistant Director, Boiler Communications, and President of the Crazy Monkeys Comedy Group.
Sounds good.
Serious question, though.
Darn.
It looks like the income gap between the rich and the poor in America keeps growing, and that the middle class is shrinking in numbers. What can we as citizens do to protect the American middle class?
Yes, Logan, this is a question that I've certainly been thinking a whole lot about. I'll tell you what, if that book hadn't been basically buttoned up in the early months of this year, I would have felt obliged to deal more with it with this question than I did, without pretending that I've got a firm answer. I do believe, like everything else, it starts with a no-holds-barred, full-throated, unapologetic commitment to grow the private sector in all its forms. I mean, that's got to be the starting point. To have the tide start lifting every boat again. But there's no question that there are structural issues right now that have begun to reduce the number of jobs at an income level that we've always associated with the middle class. And what I think of as a stable, hopeful middle class has been the single most important adhesive in keeping American society together, keeping us from getting pitted against each other. So surely a strong pro-growth policy. I'm willing to think about departures from pure economic rationality in our policies. If it means that we do, once again, find a way to address this issue you're talking about. I'll give you an example. I'm not ready yet to see that there's a future in what we call protectionist policies. Not yet, anyway. But I realize, in a way, I already am willing to make one exception. I talked about energy earlier. I think we ought to be paying Americans for the energy we need, even if it means it costs a little bit more. I want the dollars circulating here. I'll give you an example. one level down. We came to office, I'd found out that Indiana state government was buying 40% or something like it of all its goods and services from out of state. I said, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. We don't want to make a dumb business deal, but up to a point, I want to pay Hoosiers, because then they'll pay taxes to us and we'll have a few more jobs in our state. I would do the same thing nationally with regards to energy. And so we should, in my opinion, break all the ties in favor of drilling and fracking and exploring for energy here. We should build these pipelines that need thousands of people to build them, first of all, and then we'll put more people to work. I still am willing to see us require the use of biofuels in America. Do they cost a little more? Yeah. Does the money stay here? Do Purdue graduates who produce them, or maybe who rent out their acreage for windmills, of which Indiana has become a leader, get the money as opposed to some dictator elsewhere who wishes us ill? A lot of reasons to do that. I'm sorry for a long answer, but this is a really important question. I don't pretend to have anything like a final answer for you, but I'm willing to hear new ideas because I share your concern.
We've got about a minute, and I want to get the real quick question from this gentleman and a quick answer.
Okay.
My name is Nate Pigish. I'm a junior in political science. My question, I'd like to ask what all your thoughts are on all the Republican candidates, but with a limited time, what are your thoughts of Ron Paul? Because I feel like he's probably the most honest candidate I've ever seen in recent years.
Well, he is. And I don't know him, but he is that, and he is a principled person. And I think I happen to think he's wrong about a lot of things, but I think you have to have a lot of respect for him, and from a distance I do. Thank you.
My last question to you is a political question. Are there any circumstances in which you would accept the vice presidential nomination from the party?
You're asking the wrong person. If that hypothetical, and I think really utterly improbable call ever came, I'd have to talk to to the 5 women in the Daniels family again, and I got no idea what they'd say, so I can't answer.
So there is a possibility.
Yeah. We got 10 seconds left. I brought something. I mean, I know this is Brian's show, but being governor got to be good for something. And one of it is the highest honor Indiana can give, Brian, it's called the Sagamore, the Wabash. I'm extraordinarily chintzy with them. They approach me, like this when somebody's got an idea.
Is there money involved?
There is. Well, you can try eBay. I don't know. But I want you to have one.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.